It was a hot, suffocating night of November 1978. Through the narrow streets of Savannah, Georgia, an ambulance sped forward as if destiny itself were riding inside it. Inside the ambulance, Miriam was crying out in pain, her hands gripping the sweat-soaked sheet tightly. Outside the hospital, her husband, Salim, paced back and forth in anxiety. The doctor's words echoed in his ears. Delivery might be a bit complicated. This pregnancy had been different from the beginning. The baby barely moved, and in some ultrasounds, the doctors had seen a shadow of 2 colors above the baby's head. No one could explain it. They only said, "Put your trust in God." And Miriam did. When the final moment arrived, a strange silence fell over the delivery room, as if time itself had stopped breathing. The nurse said, "Just one last push." Miriam screamed, cried, clutched the doctor's hand tightly, and then the sound everyone was waiting for did not come. The baby was born silent. The doctor lifted the newborn, looked at the face, and froze. "Oh my God," was all she could say. The nurse slowly stepped closer, and then she stopped too. Half of the baby girl's head was covered with snow-white hair, and the other half was dark like the deepest night. Her skin carried a deep darkness, and when the baby opened her eyes, the room seemed to stop breathing. Those eyes were not just blue, they were sky blue, as if light itself were trapped inside them. Miriam asked in a weak voice, Is she alive?" The doctor nodded hesitantly. "Yes, absolutely. She is complete, just different." The nurse had just wrapped the baby in cloth when the door burst open. Salim ran inside, breaking all the rules with only one question on his lips. "Where is my daughter?" Miriam stretched out her arms, and the nurse placed the baby in her lap. And in that moment, fatigue, pain, tears, everything was forgotten. Miriam smiled. "Salim, look at our daughter." Salim stepped closer, and it was as if his world split into 2 parts. Everything before that moment and everything after it. Is this real?" he whispered, touching the white hair carefully as if the miracle might break. "Yes," Miriam said softly, "she is ours." At that very moment, the baby cried out loudly. It was not a weak cry, it was a declaration. As if she were telling the world, "I have arrived, I cannot be ignored." Doctors took photographs, specialists were called in, the news spread throughout the hospital, even journalists reached the doors. The doctor returned, her tone serious. "Your daughter was born with an extremely rare genetic condition. It's not dangerous, but it is unique. People will want to see her, ask questions, take pictures." Miriam pulled the baby close to her chest. "She is not a spectacle, she is my daughter." Salim took a deep breath. "Her name? We already decided." The doctor smiled. "What is it?" Miriam and Salim looked at each other. "Elia." The baby opened her eyes as if she had heard her name. This was only the beginning of a life filled with both beauty and pain. Of a girl born with 2 colors, carrying 2 lives within her.
Elia grew up in her mother's arms. Mariam would tell her stories, stories of courage, of generations, of strength. But the world is not always as gentle as stories. As Elia grew older, people's eyes began to linger on her. Some smiled, some whispered, and some asked questions without thinking. Elia at 5 years old. It was an autumn morning. The schoolyard was covered with fallen leaves. Elia was playing when a little girl came up to her, pointed at her hair, and said, "You look broken down the middle." Elia froze. Broken? Yes, half your hair is like this, half like that. The teacher immediately stepped in and ended the conversation. But those words didn't end. They kept echoing in Elia's heart. That day, as soon as she got home, Elia went into the bathroom, climbed onto a stool, and looked at herself in the mirror. First, she touched her white hair, then her black hair. Then she looked into her blue eyes. "Mom," her voice trembled, "am I strange?" Mariam immediately knelt down and held Elia's face in both hands. "Strange? No, my love, you are rare. Rare like a diamond, something that comes into the world only once in a lifetime." Elia began to cry. "But no one else is like me." Mariam smiled. "Exactly, that's why you are special." Those tears were no longer of pain, they were of comfort. That night, Mariam rested her forehead against Elias and said, "One day, the whole world will want to know who you are, but when that day comes, you will have to be strong." Mariam didn't know that that day would arrive much sooner than she imagined. Time passed. The true colors of Elia's hair became even more striking. As her beauty grew, people's reactions grew heavier. Some wanted to hug her. Some wanted to analyze her, as if she were an experiment. Some praised her, some mocked her, and some simply didn't know how to speak to someone who didn't fit into ordinary molds. At 13 years old. At school, Elia now understood everything. Students called her half sun, half moon, sometimes with affection, sometimes with sarcasm. Teachers tried, but they couldn't protect her from every wound. At home, one sentence from Mariam was always repeated: "You are not strange, you are rare." But not every beautiful sentence is enough for a young heart. One day, Elia returned from school unusually quiet. She dropped her bag on the floor and began playing with her hair, as if the answer to some unseen question was hidden there. Salim understood everything. He sat beside her quietly. "My daughter, did something happen at school today?" Elia lifted her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. "They took my pictures again. They said I should be on some website, that I'm too different to be normal." Salim took a deep breath. He knew that simply saying, "Everything will be fine," was not enough. He held Elia's hand. Sometimes the world tries to convince us that being different is wrong, but that's what only those people think who are afraid of what they don't understand. Elia asked through sobs, "Then why was I born like this?" Salim looked into her eyes. So the world could be reminded that rare things still exist, and that being different is beautiful. It is proof that God still loves creating unique things. That night, Elia stayed awake for a long time. Her father's words had settled in her heart, but one question still remained. How long will I be able to endure all of this? It was an ordinary afternoon. The house was quiet. Mariam was in the kitchen, wiping the table, when her eyes fell on a small, old envelope. No sender's name, no return address. Just a yellowed envelope, as if time itself had left it there. Mariam picked it up, and her hands began to tremble slightly. Her heartbeat quickened. She knew this was not something ordinary. At that moment, Elia came downstairs. Her hair was parted down the middle, still damp from a shower. "Mom, is everything okay?" Mariam didn't answer. She simply slid the envelope slowly toward her, as if she herself didn't have the courage to hold it. Ilya opened the envelope. Inside, there was only one photograph. A newborn baby girl lying on a cold metal hospital table. Half her hair white, half black. Blue eyes seeing light for the first time. It was Ilya herself. But this photograph had never been in the family album. No one had ever mentioned it. Ilya's stomach twisted. "Mom, who took this picture?" Mariam covered her mouth. Her breathing became rapid. "I don't know who sent it, but I know who took it. The doctor who delivered you." Ilya sat down on a chair. "But why were we never given this picture?" The old fear returned to Mariam's eyes. "They recorded your birth for research purposes. This picture, I'm seeing it for the first time." At that moment, Selim walked in. The silence in the room said everything. He looked at the photograph and the color drained from his face. "Where did this come from?" "It was out the door," Mariam replied. Selim took a deep breath, the kind of breath that carries hidden pain. Ilya looked at both of them. "You're hiding something from me, aren't you?" Silence. Mariam looked away. Selim closed his eyes. And that was answer enough for Ilya. Mariam slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to keep you safe." "From what?" Ilya's voice was breaking. Mariam clasped her hands together. "On the day you were born, some doctors saw you as a case study. Research, tests, questions. Some people wanted to separate you from me." Ilya's heart began to sink. "What?" Selim finished the sentence. "Dr. Layla stood up to protect you, but she also recorded everything. It was protocol. Some records we never saw, like this photograph." Ilya looked at the picture again. Now, it was no longer just a photograph. It felt like a threat. Someone kept all this for years, and now, why send it suddenly? Selim said quietly, "Either to warn us, or to remind us." Night fell. Ilya didn't eat dinner. She sat on the porch, staring at the dark sky. The world was moving on as usual, but inside her, something had broken. At that moment, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Just one line. "You deserve to know the truth about your birth." A cold shiver ran through Ilya's body. Then a second message. "You were not alone in that room. There is something your parents never told you." Ilya stood up. Her heart was pounding. She ran inside. "Someone is sending me messages saying you hid something from me. Is it true?" Silence. Mariam pressed a hand to her chest. Selim stared at the floor. That silence was the most painful sound of Ilya's life. "Mom, please speak." Elia's voice was trembling. Her eyes were full of questions, and a storm was raging in her heart. Miriam's lips quivered. Tears began to flow from her eyes. Selim slowly pulled a chair and sat down. There was such silence in the room that even the walls seemed afraid to hear the truth. At last, Miriam began to speak. "Elia, on the day you were born, everything wasn't the way we were told." Elia held her breath. "The doctor said she could hear 2 heartbeats. Elia's hands clenched into fists. But they said the second heartbeat belonged to a baby who didn't survive. Elia's eyes widened. What do you mean? Miriam broke down crying. That baby was just like you. Bright eyes, hair of different colors. Elia's legs wavered. Another baby? Miriam nodded. I saw her for only a few seconds. She didn't cry. She wasn't breathing. Elia's heart pounded hard. Then why did you never tell me this? Salim stood up. You were very young and we couldn't bear that pain. We didn't want you to grow up carrying a sorrow that was never your fault. Elia stepped back. Then whose sorrow was it? Yours? Now it's mine too. She turned and walked toward the door. Miriam called out, Elia, stop! But Elia was already outside. The night streets. Cold air hit her face, but she barely felt it. In her mind, there was only one voice. A sister who never was. She sat down on a bench in an empty park. Tears flowed silently from her eyes. This wasn't just the pain of a photograph. It wasn't just childhood wounds. It was the grief of a presence that came into the world with her and did not stay. At that moment, her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. The message was only one line. The other baby did not die. She was taken away. Elia's heart seemed to stop for a moment. She read the message again and again. Did not die? Her hands began to shake. Another message arrived. And I know where she is now. Elia stood up. The park lights flickered. Inside her, fear, doubt, and a hope she didn't want to believe in came alive. The phone vibrated. The final message. If you want to know the truth, come alone tomorrow, 11 a.m., Savannah Municipal Hospital, Old Administrative Building, Room 3B. Elias stared at the screen. It could be a trap. It could be a lie. But what if it was true? She slowly returned home. When she opened the door, Miriam was sitting on the couch crying. Salim was pacing the room. Elia told her everything. The messages, the meeting, the claim. Miriam's face turned pale. This could be dangerous, Salim said. And what if she's alive? Elia replied. What if my sister truly exists somewhere? Silence. Finally, Elia said firmly, I'm going. With fear, but I'm going. Mom, please say something. Aaliyah's voice was trembling. Her eyes were full of questions, and her heart was in chaos. Miriam's lips quivered. Tears began to fall from her eyes. Salim quietly pulled a chair closer and sat down. The room was so silent, it felt as if even the walls were afraid to hear the truth. At last, Miriam began to speak. Aaliyah, on the day you were born, everything was not the way we were told it was. Aaliyah held her breath. The doctor said she could hear 2 heartbeats. Aaliyah's hands curled into fists. But they said the second heartbeat belonged to a baby who could not survive. Aaliyah's eyes widened. What do you mean? Miriam broke down. That baby girl was just like you. Bright eyes, hair of different colors. Aaliyah staggered. Another girl? Miriam nodded. I saw her for only a few seconds. She didn't cry. She wasn't breathing. Aaliyah's heart pounded violently. Then why did you never tell me this? Salim stood up. You were too young, and this pain was more than we could bear.
We didn't want you to grow up carrying a grief that was never your fault. Aaliyah stepped back. Then whose pain was it? Yours? Now it's mine too. She turned and rushed toward the door. Miriam cried out, "Aaliyah, stop!" But Aaliyah was already gone. The night streets. Cold air hit her face, but she barely felt it. Only one voice echoed in her mind. A sister who never lived. She sat on a bench in an empty park. Tears flowed silently from her eyes. This wasn't just the pain of a photograph. This wasn't just childhood wounds. This was the grief of a presence that came into the world with her and couldn't stay. At that moment, her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. The message was only one line. The other baby did not die. She was taken. Aaliyah's heart seemed to stop for a moment. She read the message again and again. Did not die? Her hands began to shake. Another message arrived. And I know where she is now. Aaliyah stood up. The park lights flickered. Inside her, fear, doubt, and a hope she didn't want to believe in began to awaken. The phone vibrated. The final message. If you want the truth, come alone tomorrow, 11 a.m., Savannah Municipal Hospital, Old Administrative Building, 3B. Aaliyah stared at the screen. It could be a trap. It could be a lie. But what if it was the truth? She slowly walked back home. When she opened the door, Miriam was sitting on the sofa crying. Salim was pacing the room. Aaliyah told them everything. The messages, the meeting, the claim. Miriam's face turned pale. This could be dangerous, Salim said. And what if she's alive? Aaliyah replied. What if my sister really exists somewhere? Silence. Finally, Aaliyah said in a firm voice, I'm going. With fear, but I'm going. Early in the morning, Aaliyah woke up before sunrise. Her heart felt heavy, her mind filled with questions. She tied her two-colored hair into a simple scarf, put on dark clothes, and quietly left the house. With every step, her heart kept asking, what if all of this is a lie? And what if it's true? Savannah Municipal Hospital. The old administrative building looked abandoned even from a distance. Broken windows, walls scarred by time, and inside, a silence as if the past was still breathing. The clock struck 11 o'clock. Aaliyah opened the side door. The hallway was damp, filled with a stale smell, and the sound of her footsteps echoed back at her. Room 3B was at the end of the corridor. Aaliyah slowly opened the door. The room was empty. Is anyone here? Her voice echoed and returned to her. Her heart began to race. Suddenly, a dim light flickered. Then she heard footsteps. An elderly woman entered, her posture bent yet strong. White hair, deep, burdened eyes. Who are you? Aaliyah asked nervously. The woman studied her closely, especially her blue eyes. Then she spoke softly. I am the doctor who delivered you. Aaliyah's body went still. Dr. Layla? The woman nodded. I thought I would take this secret to my grave, but when I saw you back in the world again, I realized that silence had become a crime. The confession of the truth. Dr. Layla leaned against the desk and sat down. Aaliyah, you were not born alone. Your sister was born just seconds after you. Tears filled Aaliyah's eyes. But my mother said she wasn't alive. The doctor's voice trembled. She was weak, very weak, but she did breathe. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. At that very moment, A research team that was present in the hospital pulled me out of the room. When I returned, you were in your mother's arms, and your sister was gone." "Gone?" Elia almost screamed. The doctor closed her eyes. "They said this was an extraordinary case. They wanted to separate both of you to study. I protested, wrote reports, filed complaints. But I was young, powerless. I was threatened, told that if I spoke, my license would be taken away." Elias' heart felt shattered. "Then where is my sister?" Another photograph. Dr. Layla opened an old file and took out a photograph. A girl, about the same age as Elia. The same blue eyes, the same hair, half white, half black. Elia's hands began to tremble. "Her name is Aisha," the doctor said. "She was registered as an orphan and raised in a private institution. According to my last records, she still lives somewhere in this area." Tears streamed Elias' face. "So my sister is alive?" The doctor nodded. "I don't know the exact way to bring you together, but I knew you deserved to know the truth." A new promise. Elia pressed the photograph to her chest. It wasn't just paper. It was the missing half of her life. "I will find her," she said firmly, "no matter how long it takes." The doctor smiled faintly. "I knew you would say that." Elia stepped outside the hospital. The world was the same, but she herself had changed. She was no longer just a girl with two colors. She was a sister, about to reclaim the lost half of her lost soul. That day, Elia kept staring at the photograph for a long time. Aisha, a name that had suddenly entered her life, yet had always existed somewhere in her heart. That photograph was not just proof for her, it was a call. Returning home. When Elia reached home, Mariam and Salim were already standing at the door. They didn't ask anything. They saw the truth in Elia's eyes. Elia placed the photograph on the table. Mariam looked at it and her hands began to tremble. "This? She's my sister," Elia said softly. "Aisha, she's alive." Mariam broke down crying, but this time those tears were not of pain. Then Salim took a deep breath. "We'll find her, not alone, together." The search begins. Elia opened her laptop. Research, records, orphanage files. Everywhere there were only incomplete clues. But one name kept appearing again and again. St. Aurora Care Institute, an old private institution that in the 1980s was known for housing rare children. Elia's heart began to race. The first phone call. Elia dialed the number. A few moments, then a voice. "St. Aurora Institute, how may we help you?" Elia gathered her courage. I'm looking for information about a child who was brought there in 1978 with an unusual identity." Silence fell on the other end. Then came the reply. "We do not provide such information over the phone. Please submit a written request." The call ended. Elia closed her eyes. This wasn't going to be easy. An old record. Salim contacted an old friend who had once worked at the state records office. A few days later, he returned with a file. Written on it were the words, A.M., female, 1978, special case. Mariam's hands trembled. "This is her," she whispered. But the file was incomplete. The address had been erased. A ray of hope.
That same night, Elia received an email. No name, just one sentence. Aisha has spent her entire life looking into the mirror, asking the same question. Is there someone else like me? Elia's eyes filled with tears. This couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be her. Elia immediately typed a reply. I am the one you've been searching for. Her heart was pounding. A few minutes, then hours. Finally, a response came. If you're telling the truth, then you'll know. Where are our hairs divided? Elia smiled and wrote back, exactly down the middle, just like our lives.
After the email, silence fell. Neither Elia slept nor Aisha. Both of them knew there was no turning back now. The message to meet. The next morning, Elia received a short message. If all of this is true, then let's meet. Tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. at Savannah's old Riverside Park. Elia's breath seemed to stop. This moment could be a dream or the greatest truth of her life. That evening, by the river, a light breeze was blowing. The sun was setting, and the sky was bathed in golden light. Elia stood near a bench. Her hair was loose, parted down the middle. Her heart pounded faster with every approaching step. Suddenly, she saw someone coming. Dark clothes, simple appearance. As she drew closer, time stood still. That face, those eyes, the same shade of blue. That hair, half white, half black. The same line Elia saw every day in the mirror. They stopped just a few steps apart. No one spoke. There was no need to say anything. Aisha's voice broke the silence first. Do you also, every morning, look in the mirror and wonder why all of this is the way it is? Tears flowed from Elia's eyes. Every day. They stepped closer. One moment, just one moment. Then they wrapped their arms tightly around each other. This was not an ordinary embrace. It was two lives that had finally found their missing half. People were present in the park, but no one knew what kind of miracle they were witnessing. The voice of truth. Aisha stepped back and looked at Elia's face. I spent my whole life thinking I was different. I was told I was alone. Elia said softly, and I was told I was rare, but not incomplete. They both smiled. Now they knew they had never been alone. The promise. They sat down on the bench. The river flowed quietly. Aisha said, I don't know what will happen next. Elia held her hand. But we won't be alone. The sun fully set. The first star appeared in the sky. Two sisters sat in silence, a mirror in which, at last, two faces could be seen. After that evening by the river, nothing was ever the same for Elia and Aisha. They had grown up in different homes, endured different kinds of pain, but now they both knew their roots were the same. Returning home. When Elia told everything to Miriam and Salim, time itself seemed to stop. Miriam held Aisha's photograph with both trembling hands. She is my daughter, she sobbed. I saw her every night in my dreams. Salim closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his cheek. She is alive, was all he could say. The first meeting, mother and daughter. A few days later, the moment arrived for which no words exist. Miriam opened the door, and there stood Aisha. Miriam said nothing.
She stepped forward and embraced her lost daughter. That embrace was free of questions. It was only a mother and her child. Facing the truth. Dr. Lila finally gave her official statement. Old records were reopened. Investigations began. Some people who had remained silent for years started to speak. But for Elia and Aisha, the most important thing was not justice. It was having each other. A new identity. Elia and Aisha decided to speak together, not as a case, not as a spectacle, but as human beings. They visited schools, spoke at conferences, and told the world, being different is not a weakness. It is a reminder that every human being is a story. Final scene. One day, the two sisters stood in front of a mirror. Their hair parted down the middle, white on one side, black on the other. Aisha smiled and said, "We are the same." Elia replied, "And yet complete." Message. This story was not only about two sisters. It was about everyone who was ever called strange, made to feel different or silenced. If you've come this far, remember one thing. What makes you different is exactly what makes you powerful.